Welcome to the channel. Thank you everybody for tuning in today. Today's review is going to be a comparison between the Proxima Tuna and the SteelDive Tuna. I've recently had a chance to review the Proxima Tuna and I've been buying a lot more Proxima products, and so seeing as I've reviewed the SteelDive Tuna as well previously on my channel, I thought it'd be a good idea to give you a comparison between the two. I'm basically going to highlight the main differences between both the SteelDive SD1975 tuna homage and the Proxima Marine Master 300 tuna homage. Now, before I go any further, please take this opportunity to please subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. I appreciate everybody's support to date. Also remember to hit that notifications bell so you're up to date with all the latest reviews, and remember to check the description. There will be any important affiliated links. There'll also be a link to my eBay store, and there'll be just general information about the video, about the watches. Let's start off with specifications and dimensions. Spec wise, both are nearly identical. The only difference here being the Proxima comes with a SS bezel insert, whereas the SteelDive comes with a ceramic bezel insert. So they both got sapphire, they both run NH35 movements from Seiko Epson, which are 24 joule hand winding and hacking movements. They beat at 21,600 beats per hour or vibrations per hour, which translates into a sweep of 6 ticks per second. They also both use 316L stainless steel case constructions. The Proxima on my left, it has a monoblock case, and as we identified in the review, it's not carved from a solid piece of stainless steel. There's actually a witness line under the shroud for the Proxima, whereas the Tuna is a bit more conventional with a case back. Now, the important thing here is dimensions. How do these watches differ dimensionally if they're meant to homage the same thing? Now, over and over again, I am, I'd say, surprised, not in a negative way, when I do comparisons for like models from different brands. Myself, as well as a lot of other people out there, assume that they're from the same factory. They might well be, but I do find small differences between nearly all of the ones that I've checked, and it's mostly down to like finishing. So it is possible that they might come from the same factory, but as with China, you get what you pay for, and as with most things as well. So what you'll find is certain brands are paying for more in terms of finishing, or they want a few extra steps to be included in a process, and that's different to some of the other brands. And that's the whole point of these comparisons, is to identify which is the brand that's, you know, trying to make more effort, that is going the extra, you know, few steps or lengths. So that being said, let's look at dimensions, which is going to give us a first clue to any differences. So on my left, Proxima, let's start off with that first. The Proxima has a diameter of 48 millimeters with a thickness of 14.2 and a log to log of 45.3. Now you might be saying, well, it's a round case, almost perfectly round. Why is there a log to log and diameter difference? That's because the logs do sit on the top and bottom of the case, so they're a bit shorter. However, obviously through the center of the actual shroud, that circumference stays it's not a perfect circle, so but it is close to the 48 mil diameter. Now those are the dimensions for the Proxima, and dimensions for the SteelDive. You've got a diameter of 47 mil, or more accurately 47.4, and you've got a thickness of 14.6 and a log to log of 44.5. So they are pretty similar with, you know, point whatever of a millimeter between them. The only significant difference here is within the diameter, where the SteelDive is 47.4 to be exact, and the Proxima is 48. Now that's just down to the shroud. I think you can already tell visually that the shroud is a bit thicker on the Proxima, and that is one of the main differences between both watches. Let's go in a bit closer now, and let's find what differences there are between the actual dials on the watches. Now, obviously you've noticed I've not put the bracelets on both these watches. That's because I'm not a fan of both of the bracelets that come with either. So I decided to take it off, make the reviewing a little bit easier, and just focus on the actual watch head. So going back to the dial, we can see, yes, there's a clear difference. Now, for the purpose of this review, the SD1975 from SteelDive. This is the more classical representation of the Seiko tuna. This is closer in homogeneous. That's because most of the tuners do come with a very similar dial to this. The dial on the left is a more traditional Marine Master dial found on the Seiko, and the Proxima have used that on pretty much most of their range. They use that Marine Master dial, and I do prefer the Marine Master dial here. I love the indices over here, and between the two, that is the main difference. Of course, applied indices, you've got a bit of detail around the indices as well. You've got this polished edge that goes around all the hour markers. You've got a mix of baton and circular hour markers. You've also got this date frame, which is in white, and the date window or the date disc is white. And you've got the Proxima and the Scuba Master at the 12 and 6. They're all printed. You've also got a chapter ring, which is also printed. So moving on to the SteelDive, you've got no application of indices or hour markers. Now this is just applied Lume, so which has been layered to give you that slightly 3D effect. And you've also got printing. Usually this is a sterile model, so usually at the 12 o'clock you'll have the SteelDive logo, which we've all seen, and at 6 o'clock you've got Marine Master Professional 300 meters. And what you'll notice here is you've also got a printed chapter ring. Now that is the main difference, being the hour markers on both dials. Now the dial itself, they both are black. SteelDive give you a few different color options. Proxima give you this as it is, and with a gilt, so you've got gilt borders around the indices and the hands. So between the two, you've got, apart from the hour markers and the dial, the other difference that you will notice is that the chapter ring is thicker on the Proxima, and therefore the legibility on the Proxima is greatly improved, and it is superior to the SteelDive, where you've got just thinner markers along the chapter ring. The printing, for the most part, between the two, there isn't much difference when it comes to the dial. Now the other significant difference that you'll see is the date disc on this tuna is in black, which is a nice feature. It gives you some color matching, and whereas on the Proxima it is in white. Let me just move this hour hand so it's a bit clearer for you guys to see. I don't actually mind either, because I think even the white date disc does suit the dial on the Proxima. Now after that, the second biggest difference that you'll see on the dial is the hands. Now both are classical tuna, style hands. Now on the Proxima you can see they're highly polished, but you've got that same design replicated across in the SteelDive SD1975. However, the finishing is different. They are brushed and they seem just slightly smaller. You can see the Proxima ones are a bit thicker and a bit bigger, whereas the SteelDive just a bit smaller and brushed. But they both use the same seconds hand. Preference wise, I don't have a preference between either. I think brushed looks great as well, but these polished ones seem to match that whole polished look that you can see on this Proxima. The thing we're going to look at is the bezel inserts. Well, the bezel inserts, the SteelDive SD1975 just comes with this black ceramic bezel insert. You won't get any other options, whereas we know Proxima notoriously have 15,000 different bezel inserts. And this one is in the stainless steel, polished. It's not as practical, to be honest, because it has picked up micro scratches already, and I have not even worn the watch. To be absolutely honest, it's just been here and I've just polished it a couple of times. Maybe that's what caused it. But it's also a 12-hour bezel insert, whereas this is the more traditional on the SteelDive. The actual bezels itself, so there is a noticeable difference on both bezels. If you can just take a look here, so the scallops carved into the bezels, you can see they are shorter on the Proxima and they're just slightly longer on the tuna. A very small difference, but it is clearly visible. They both use 120 click bezels, unidirectional rotation, and between them, let's just have a look. So the sound, the movement on this bezel is fine. It's actually quite pleasant, and it is quite precise as well, with very tiny amount of playback. But the playback is not significant, as it does not go like past a click, so there's not that much on here. Now the bezel on the SteelDive, equally as pleasant, does sound and feel just a touch different, but nothing which immediately jumps out, that's less superior than the Proxima. I think they both are slightly different, but again, it doesn't indicate any perceived quality or any added value. So just to pause there, I am scoring them as I go along. I'll give you the scores at the end, but if in case you want to know, when we're looking at the dial, we're looking at the indices, if they're printed, if they're applied, hands, the finish and style. We're looking at the logos and fonts. We're looking at date windows, what kind of finishing do they have. We're looking at just general color, finish, alignment of the dial. We're also looking at the lume used and chapter rings if they do exist. So just touching on the lume, they both use C3 Super Luminova lume. They both have really good lume. We'll do a lume shot in fact just after this. But scoring wise, the SteelDive, I've scored it at a 5 and the Proxima at a 7. The reason is there's a lot more done on the dial and the printing, so that's why that's got 2 extra points on the Proxima, because the printing is a bit better around the chapter ring. It makes it more legible over the SteelDive, and of course the applied index and the hour markers, and there's a lot more detail going on the dial. So a bezel insert, they both score a 4 on there as well, because like I said, there's no difference between the two. There is only a very small aesthetic difference. So when we're looking at the lume on both watches, you know, they both are clearly mismatched. There's a bit of a mumble jumble going on here. On the Proxima on the left, you've got BGW9 on the dial, and you've got C3 Super Luminova on the hands. Now, to your right, on the SteelDive SD1975, we've got BGW9 around the bezel insert, and you've got C3 on the dial and C3 on the hands. So you can see that by, you know, dual lume, if you will. Now, it's purely subjective. Some people really dislike the 2 different colors. I don't mind. I think it's just, you know, it's just lights, and I think they look quite cool in my honest opinion. But between them, there's no issue. They both use pretty good quality lume. The longevity is going to be, you know, very acceptable, and you know, they might look dull slightly, but this is just natural lighting. I use LED lighting in the room I'm in, so this is the lume generated just from normal LED indoor lighting. I've not bothered to flash them with the UV ray, just to give you a better perspective on what, you know, they're going to look like in and around the house. Obviously they'll get brighter if you take them outside and you come back inside. Let's move on to the crystals. Now this is where you're going to see another difference here. Both use dome sapphire crystal, both have AR coating. Yes, it can be argued it's a bit strong, but I think lighting does add that a significant amount of glare, as you can see coming through the camera. Now the main difference, well, the only difference between the two that I can see is there's a chamfered edge around the crystal on the Proxima. So you can see that refraction, you can see those hour markers coming through that chamfer edge, and there's no chamfer edge on the Tuna. Now this could be subjective as well. It depends what people like. If you like this, you know, super tight finish where there's no chamfer edge and you've got, you know, this great flushness from the crystal to the actual watch, and some people actually prefer this. For me, just based on value add, I'd say a crystal with a chamfer edge is usually more expensive than one without the chamfer edge, because you've got extra machining, there's extra work gone into it. So for the purpose of scoring, the crystal on the Proxima scores 2, so 1 point for fit and finish and 1 point for just style. And the fit and finish, as you can see, is actually pretty great. Almost, well, it is perfect, there's no issues, very spot on. And the same thing with the SteelDive, there's nothing I can take away from that except there's no chamfer edge on the crystal. Okay, so the second to last category for comparison on both these watches is the actual case. Now between the two, this is where we see most of the differences. Now of course the case is covered by the shroud, so first we're going to look at the difference between the shrouds, and then I'll de-shroud both tuners and we'll have a look at the case underneath the shroud and see how far that quality really does go. So the Proxima, you can see the notes, you know, visually what you can see at eye level especially is look how smooth that brushing is. You've got linear brushing all around the actual shroud, and that's quite fine. You can see, you can't see many lines, or they're not as visible. Now what you'll also see is, just pay attention to the shroud there. You can see the edges, how they're curved, they've been polished. You also got this polished lip here, and the finishing on the shroud on the Proxima is a lot smoother, and as well as obviously the brushing as mentioned. The screws, you know, you've got these screws that hold the shroud to the case, they're okay, lugs are fine, and you've also got this, let's have a look here. So where the shroud meets the crown, you've got this edge which has been chamfered and it has been polished to give you this very smooth finish. Sorry, I'm just get some focus on here. So you can see there some added bit of workmanship on the actual shroud. Right, so this is where you are going to see the difference in the SteelDive SD1975. So the brushing, you can see, is just a touch coarser, and you can see the individual lines. Not only that, you can also see the shroud. The shroud isn't as smooth as it is on the Proxima. There's definitely a lot more machining gone into the shroud that's used on the Proxima, and that is why we had that discrepancy between the diameter of both watches. This shroud is a lot thinner. Well, when I say a lot, subjective and relative term, but you can just see here, if I put them side to side, so you can see where the shroud roughly here goes straight up, but where on the Proxima you've got it's angled, right? So you can just see that there. And obviously it's noticeably thinner as well, and it doesn't have this polished lip here. What it also doesn't have is that chamfered edge or beveled edge that we can see on the Proxima. Sorry, I'm just trying to get a bit of focus here. There we go. So you can see so now that how that is that going to affect you. So when you go in to reach for the crown, you know, that's going to be a lot smoother down there, and it also visually gives you this effect that the crown is slightly recessed into the shroud, whereas here you have no recess. But let's have a look at the crowns also. Now the crowns on both watches, I don't think either one is better. I think they're slightly different. You've got really thin splines that go around the crown on the Proxima. It's relatively easy and comfortable to operate and to screw in and out. It's got a solid spring to it as well, so it gives you a very positive pop, so you know it's out. And you can see that crown there, and you can see the crown on the Proxima. I do like this little collar that comes with the crown on the actual SteelDive. So crown points are just 1-1, and whereas the actual case finishing or the shroud finishing goes, I've decided to score the Proxima ahead by 1 point. Both are really effective, but the Proxima has clearly more machining, and it's a better quality shroud than the Tuna. What we're going to do is very quickly, we're going to remove both shrouds and give the cases a quick once over to see how far down that quality really goes. So we just need to get ourselves a couple of hex keys or hex screwdriver bits. Here's both shrouds, just so you can have a better look at the shrouds. The shrouds off, the first thing what we can do is look at the bezels a little bit closer. So let's see what sounds the bezels make. This is the SteelDive. There's a very minute amount of playback within the bezel on the SteelDive. Now let's look at the Proxima. Yes, you can just hear that just by the sound alone, that mechanism is quite a bit tighter. There's no playback within the actual bezel, so the bezel mechanism on the Proxima is slightly superior, and that's something which we can see now with the shrouds being removed. Now moving on to the case finishes, so you can see the SteelDive, the case is polished all the way around, and that's a very high level of polishing. There's the crown. So if you ever wanted to wear this SteelDive without the shroud, this is what you're looking at. Now, whereas the Proxima, just slightly disappointing, but you can actually see this witness line that goes around the case, which number one shows that it isn't a full or a proper monoblock construction. However, it looks like it was possibly molded. Bezel wise, we might have to reevaluate. I'd give the bezels a slightly different score now, so I'm going to score the Proxima up one, and yeah, just give it one more point, and that will impact the end scores. That being done, there is an added benefit to obviously the SteelDive SD1975, which makes modding this a whole lot easier because you've just got to remove the case back, whereas with the Proxima you'll have to take the bezel off and go in from the top down in order for you to access the dial or hands. The final thing that remains now for us to review is the bracelets that they both come on. Now with the Tuna, as we looked at it, we saw that, you know, Proxima went with this very thick, heavy duty bracelet, and with SteelDive they use this engineer style bracelet with they both have solid links, solid end links, straight end links. Now, what are thoughts on this? Well, straight off the bat, obviously Proxima, just because they've used a lot more material on their bracelet, and this bracelet is their own, and you can't really see these bracelets on AliExpress as aftermarket options that are readily available by any vendor. So they're gonna have a point for that just for them because it's their own bracelet. Now the bracelet is very hefty. You know, I did make a little wisecrack about if I were to weigh this in, I might get the value of the watch from the scrapyard. But yeah, that is the reality. Is anybody who gets this will know that that bracelet is extremely substantial. Now this bracelet is a bit more risk friendly from SteelDive. However, these are these generic aftermarket bracelets that you can get from many vendors on AliExpress. One thing I'll say, the finish on the bracelet by Proxima is a bit better. You can see it's all brushed. It's got linear brushing, all the links have, and there is not that much edginess, even though the plastic is wrapped on the SteelDive. You know, I'm quite accustomed to these bracelets, so I have loads of these SteelDives coming in. This bracelet is slightly edgy, but still comfortable for the most part. But they both use stamped clasps, so they both use stamped clasps. What Proxima have said is that going further, so for the future models, all of them should have milled clasps, anything with the bracelet. There's no such news from SteelDive, but SteelDive are known to have poor bracelets. For the most part, Proxima do have pretty decent ones. SteelDive don't really invest too much in the bracelets. They use these generic aftermarket straps. You can also get a hex ad style bracelet from SteelDive. You have an option of 2 when you choose to buy the SD1975. So how do we weigh that up? I think if we just look at it by value add, the Proxima is going to come out on top. There's 1 point difference between the two, so Proxima will get 3 and SteelDive will get 2, and that's on material, fit, finish and quality, clasp and fitting, features, end link type, etc. There's 1 point between them, so let's start totaling up the points and let's see where we've got to. Okay, here we have the final outcome. Yes, ignore the writing, it's just messy. I'll be surprised if anyone reads anything from this paper. So okay, let's try to quantify this. Between them, points wise, the SteelDive scored 18 and the Proxima scored 24, so there's a 6 point difference. Yeah, 6 points seems about right. That's because of the detail I've looked into both watches now. But let's look at price now. Let's see value for money. So price, the SteelDive SD1975, you can pick it up as low as £100 square from AliExpress, and the Proxima 172 for this particular version. So there's a £72 difference. So now, does 6 points equal £70? If you know, a point starts equating to about £10, that's quite a lot, to be honest. I don't think that an additional £70 justifies or equates to how good this Proxima is compared to the SteelDive. In my original review of the SteelDive, I said it then that this is a exceptionally great value for money piece. If you want just a tuna homage, then go for the SteelDive, hands down. You won't miss anything. The build quality is still awesome. As you guys can see, you do get a lot for your money. And then if you spend £100 on this, you also have then leeway to improve it if you want to buy a different kind of bracelet, if you want to mod, change the hands, change dial, whatever you want to do. So this is hands down the best option between the two. Proxima, yes, it's nice, it's got a few different touches, few different details. It might be more favorable to that enthusiast, because obviously you can get that, you know, dial, but if you're not too fussed and you want to do a dial change anyway, then definitely go for the SteelDive. So within this comparison, SteelDive does win. A point on that, SteelDive will probably win most of the comparisons out there when you look between the brands, unless you're comparing something significantly poor from SteelDive. What SteelDive do have is they've got that amazing value for money factor, which nobody can deny when it comes to Seiko homages and the like. A good price would be around the £150 mark, and I think in the sales you can get the Proxima for about that much. So there you have it. This is my review or comparison between the two watches, and that's my outcome. I'd say SteelDive, but if you want that, just that little bit extra, just go with that Proxima with that finer finishing on the shroud, and that's it. So thank you everybody for watching. Thank you for tuning in. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Which one would you go for and why? And then I'll see you on the next video.